was a senior in high school, my friend Brian's parents went on a getaway to Hawaii for their anniversary, so he was left home alone. His older sister was already in college, so basically the place was all his. And what does a teenager do in that situation? He throws a party, of course. But not just any kind of party. Brian threw something monumental. One of those parties where you don't just invite a couple of friends, you end up calling half the high school. We're talking crazy, where at least 200 people showed up. The house was already buzzing with music. People were in full party mode, drinking and dancing like there was no tomorrow. Come to think of it, the planning was a disaster. Brian wasn't the type to fuss over who was on his guest list. He just posted a message on Facebook saying, "Bring your friends," and that was it. People came in with no shame, like, "Oh yeah, I know this guy, of course I can come in." And because the door was open, whoever came in, they just let anybody in. Most of the people were great, and we ended up meeting some great new people. But of course, we also learned an important lesson. Don't invite everyone if you don't want some weird and undesirable characters to show up. In the midst of the revelry, amidst the loud music and laughter, at one point the atmosphere got a little tense. It turns out that one of those random guys who crashed the party was caught stealing something, and luckily, someone who knew Brian saw him and decided to act. He was a good guy and just wanted to make sure nothing bad happened to the house. So he told the thief to do the thief a favor and get out before things got ugly. However, things started to get heated, and the burglar and the Good Samaritan began to argue. In the end, the crook's friends tried to intervene, but they were completely out of their league. There were many more people in Brian's favor at the party, so the thief's group decided it was best to leave. They went towards the front door of the house, but just at that moment, a mutual friend, Duke, threw some rather disparaging remarks at them. He went on about how he practiced mixed martial arts and that they had better not try to be smart or he would kick their asses. Even though Duke was just trying to play tough, a tense atmosphere began to form in the air and things got ugly very quickly. The thief's friends got fired up and started arguing with him. Then the music dropped. Everyone stopped dancing, and all our eyes focused on what was going on outside. The whole party atmosphere we had had a couple of minutes before turned into a real drama show. A couple of minutes passed that felt like hours, but in the end it didn't escalate, as fortunately Brian, being the sensible host, tried to calm the waters and prevent things from getting even more out of control. After a while, the bad guys left, but the party had completely changed the air. The energy was no longer the same, but what happened next was total madness. After the guys left, Duke stood in the doorway, bragging like a hero and puffing out his chest as if to say, "Oh yeah, it was me who kicked these idiots out." People began to applaud him, giving him the glory he had never really had. We just laughed at the situation, but a few minutes later, we heard some weird noises in the street, and then bang, 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 bang. A burst of gunfire that we didn't know where it came from, but then the hero collapsed on the ground. It turns out that one of the guys who had been kicked out of the party had returned with a gun, pulled it out of the street, and without hesitation, basically unloaded the weapon towards the door of the house right where Duke was standing, who ended up getting shot 4 times in the back and once in the neck. Chaos immediately ensued. Everyone started screaming and running in panic, some towards Duke and others just ran away from the party. Meanwhile, several of us called 911. The ambulance arrived much faster than we imagined, but unfortunately, one of the shots had severed an artery or something, I heard. And although he was rushed to the hospital, Duke did not survive. The guy fled in a car immediately after the shooting, but turned himself in to the police the next day, as, according to him, he didn't realize there were people behind the door and only wanted to scare and damage something, but not murder anyone. Bullshit. However, due to his confession, and that he voluntarily turned himself in, he managed to avoid a second murder charge, so he received a fairly light sentence of only 15 years. This all happened exactly 15 years ago, and now this guy has just been released, which gives enormous courage, and also some fear. It's not at all fair that this guy is free to go on with his life as if nothing happened, while Duke didn't even have a chance to defend himself or do anything to be able to save his own. The very idea that the same guy who shot him is crawling around town like it's nothing steals my sleep. How are we supposed to act? As if all that didn't happen? Pretend it was a bad dream? While I'm thankful I didn't get shot myself, this is something that's stuck in my mind and there's no way I'm going to forget it. Truth be told, what I'm most worried about is running into this guy at the supermarket or some other place in town. I don't know if I could contain myself. I hope he makes the decision to move to another state because I can't imagine him feeling comfortable returning to the same area where he killed someone, where he brought mourning into the bosom of a family. That would be too much. Last year I turned 23, and in addition to partying with my friends and colleagues, my guy's mom also wanted to take me out, so she went ahead and booked a table at a downtown bar for that Saturday night. When the long-awaited Saturday arrived, as always, there was unbearable traffic in the city. Downtown is always packed on weekends. I already figured that my mother-in-law and I would have to leave the car in a parking lot about 4 blocks away and walk to the bar where we would meet my fiancé and the rest of the group, so I was not taken by surprise by the situation. We started walking and came to a crosswalk where we had to wait for the light to change. There were maybe 8 or 9 other people in the same situation. While I was there, distracted in my things and talking to my mother-in-law, all of a sudden, I noticed a girl standing next to me. She honestly gave me quite a scare, as she appeared out of nowhere and was so close that I could almost feel her breath on the back of my neck. It was as if she was seeking shelter, like when a scared child clings to her daddy. Yes, it was like that, but this girl was leaning toward me. She had long red hair down to her waist and was wearing a long printed dress that came down to her knees with a leather jacket and sandals. From her appearance, she looked to be about my age, but she had very dark skin and light eyes, although I was sure they were contact lenses. Her look was pretty normal, but her behavior was strange. She kept holding her nose as if she was smelling something unpleasant and looked around with a frightened expression, as if she was expecting something to surprise her, or she was being chased. In truth, she was acting like a frightened animal. Her eyes seemed empty, and her face showed no emotion. She was very strange, really, and since I didn't like her being so close, I moved aside. But guess what? She also moved and approached again, getting as close as before. I thought this was strange, but I tried not to make a big deal out of it. The world is full of strange people, and that didn't mean she was necessarily dangerous, but she was annoying. Just at that moment, the traffic light turned green, and I assumed I could get rid of her presence because we were going different ways, but still. She crossed the street and, surprisingly, continued next to me in the same proximity as before. I tried to move away again, but she stuck to me again. It was crazy. No matter how many times I tried to move away, the weird girl always managed to appear next to me again in the middle of the crowd, holding her nose and nervously looking around. It was awkward, and I really didn't know quite how to react. But at that moment, my boyfriend's mom came up to her and asked, "Hey girl, do you need anything? Are you okay?" But the girl's answer was somewhat disturbing. "It's not safe," was all she said. Then she slowly raised her head, tilted her face a little, and stared into my eyes without saying anything else. I noticed that his mouth was trembling, and that made me even more uneasy. At that moment, my fiancé's mom and I looked at each other, thinking, what the hell is going on? I wanted to get away from that freaky girl as fast as possible, because she was already creeping me out, And not only was she invading my personal space, but now she was looking at me in a really weird way. My boyfriend's mom came up to me and in a low tone told me to walk faster and not to look at her anymore, so that's what I did. But to our surprise, the girl followed us to the bar. Even though my boyfriend's mom asked her to stay away, she just said she wanted to be with us. The truth is that the situation was already desperate, and I was losing my patience, so I just walked with my head down, annoyed and tormented by her presence. Finally, we arrived at the bar. We took out our IDs as fast as possible to get in and escape from the monster that was following us. But what do you think? She came in too and sat at our table, although she stayed on the far side at first, but then the situation became even more bizarre as she started to creep towards us. Every time we looked away, suddenly, if you turned your head, there he was, one seat closer, with that empty, strange look on his face. Then, my boyfriend's mom, fed up with all this, got up and went to talk to the security of the place, asking him to make her leave. The guy approached her and told her she had to leave, but the girl started arguing, asking why she had to leave and claiming she could sit wherever she wanted. She got really aggressive when the security guy told her that that seat was reserved for us, and that she was not part of our group. In the end, the security guy ended up practically dragging her out of the venue. I actually felt a little bad for her, but I was also more relieved that she was off my back. However, the craziest thing was about to happen. As the guard was almost dragging her towards the exit, she started struggling, kicking and screaming that they couldn't kick her out because the aliens were going to take her away if she moved away from the light, which apparently was me. She also started saying that she was an Illuminati and that we were all going to die if they, the aliens I assumed, came and she was not in the light. In short, she started spouting a lot of nonsensical nonsense, which only evidenced that she was either not in her right mind or was under the influence of some substance. The security guard finally removed her from the premises, while everyone watched the scene curiously. After that, everything was quiet, and it looked like my birthday celebration was going to be great. We were all chatting, having a few shots and having a great time, until about 20 minutes after the guard took the woman out, we started to hear a commotion coming from the entrance of the bar. Suddenly, everyone started to approach the place to see what was going on, so we decided to check it out too. We approached the exit and managed to see a group of people crowded on the sidewalk a few meters away. We walked over there to see what it was all about, and when we got there, we were completely overcome with horror. There, lying on the ground in a fetal position and completely immobile, was the girl from earlier. Her face had turned a grayish color. Her eyes were wide open and with a panicked expression that gave us chills, while a kind of white foam was coming out of her mouth. It was evident that she was dead. A few seconds later, an ambulance and a police patrol car arrived. They sent to clear the area, while 2 paramedics approached and assisted the girl. But after taking her pulse and evaluating her for a few seconds, they declared her dead on the spot. After a few minutes, a van arrived at the site and took the body away. I was in complete shock. I felt a knot in my stomach, and my hands were shaking. I had never seen a dead body before in my life, and just thinking that this girl was alive and next to me just a few moments ago gave me goosebumps. As you can imagine, after that we went home. We had to walk the same 4 blocks back to the parking lot where my mother-in-law's car was. And along the way, I couldn't stop thinking about the girl and the fact that less than 2 hours ago, that woman was walking next to us on those same streets. It made me reflect on how fragile life is and how unpredictable fate can be. This fact had a great impact on me, and obviously the last thing I had that day was the desire to celebrate. The next morning, the local newspaper reported the news, since the place where it happened is one of the most popular nightclubs in the city. It turned out that just as we suspected, The girl had died of an overdose. Her name was Brianna, and she was 22 years old. Needless to say, this was the worst birthday celebration of my life. I really hope that this year's will be much better and no spooky events will occur. If I've learned anything in 19 little years of life, it's that the world is a pretty creepy place sometimes. Let me tell you what happened to me one random night a few months ago. I'm Alexa. I live in the UK. And about 6 months ago, I was celebrating the birthday of my friend Jason. And sure enough, we went out for drinks. The idea was to have a good time and then move to a trendy club with other friends. So we did, and everything was going great that night. Everything was partying, laughing, loud music, and many shots of tequila. The night was promising. When the clock struck 1 in the morning, my friends started to call it a night. Most of them decided to go home, but I wasn't ready to go home yet. There were people I knew in the place, and I started talking to some of them and hanging out, so I didn't want to leave so soon. So I stayed a while longer, enjoying the atmosphere. The club closed at 3 a.m., so I thought, relax, there's still time. But before I knew it, I had already had my last drink, and the truth is that I was already pretty overdrunk at that point. But like all drunken fools, I thought I still had room for one more drink to extend the party. I was one of the last people to leave the club that night. It was about 3:20 in the morning, and my state was definitely not the best. A couple of blocks away from the bar was the bus station, but instead of walking there like most of the guys coming out of the club area and going home to sleep, I made the brilliant decision to walk to my boyfriend's house, Lucas. Under normal conditions, it wouldn't be that much of a problem, but of course it's after 3 in the morning. I'm pretty drunk and I'm in heels and a dress that barely allows me to move. Lucas's house was only a 30-minute walk away, so I quickly started my impromptu parade. But I didn't even call Lucas to tell him I was on my way, as my phone decided it was the perfect time to die. Great, right? Just when I wanted to tell him I would need him to come pick me up, my phone was dead, so there I was, walking alone through the city in the wee hours of the morning. I was making an almost supernatural effort to maintain my sanity and stability, because I had drunk more than my body was capable of taking, but I refused to succumb to tonight's madness. However, as I was walking down the street trying not to make a fool of myself in public, a guy approached me out of nowhere. At first I thought he might be an acquaintance, but no, he was a perfect stranger. The guy started complimenting me and boldly asked for my number. I, very correctly, told him no. But then the man, who wouldn't give up, started yelling at me in the middle of the street to give it to him. At that moment, confusion and fear took over me completely. I didn't have my phone, I was completely drunk, and I didn't know how to defend myself, so I started screaming while trying to run in my stilettos, which were obviously not the most comfortable in the world. At that instant, a group of people who looked to be in their 30s and 40s came out of a nearby hotel and came to see what was going on. I didn't understand much of what they were saying because their English wasn't very good, but they wanted to help me. And fortunately, the guy left me alone, but in the end I ended up with the same problem. My phone dead, and I still had about 6 blocks to go before I got to my boyfriend's apartment. The group of guys who helped me get rid of the guy who had been chasing me offered to give me a ride, but I refused, instead deciding to keep walking alone. Despite the mess, I figured I had about 10 minutes to go, so I tried to take a good look at what was around me. But my glasses were at home, and I was having trouble seeing clearly. Anyway, I couldn't let that stop me. I had to get there, so I kept going. However, shortly after saying goodbye to the group, I started to realize that a car was passing me again and again, and to be honest, I'm one of the most paranoid people you can find. Even more so when I'm in a situation like this. My heart was starting to pound like crazy because I knew this didn't smell good at all. Even though I kept telling myself that everything was fine, and that I shouldn't panic, I couldn't help but get that uneasy feeling in my stomach. With every turn the car took, the more insecure I felt. I had had enough drama for one night, so I tried to stay calm. But every time I heard the engine approaching, it made me want to run, to escape as if I were in an action movie. At that moment, I would have given anything to have my cell phone or a friend by my side. But, like everything else in life, I had to keep moving forward and not let fear stop me. So I took a deep breath, adjusted my dress, and told myself it was just a few more minutes to get home. Little did I know that this night was not meant to end the way I had imagined. In the midst of all the paranoia I was feeling as the car continued to circle the corner, I sought shelter behind a wall surrounding some apartments. My heart was beating a mile a minute, and I was sure it was going to burst out of my chest. As I crouched down, I could hear the engine slowly approaching until it stopped for a second and my worst fears were realized. Two guys got out of the car. One was a short guy, but the other was huge, and to my misfortune, I recognized the tall guy. It was the same guy who had harassed me before. That sight was like a stab in the chest. Immediately, tears started to fill my eyes, and at that moment I didn't know what else to do. So I started praying as if that could get me out of the situation. Please God, help me, I thought. I knew I was in big trouble, so I ducked and ran towards a group of apartment blocks that was nearby. The fact that I was hiding like this made me feel like I was in a horror movie. But there was no time to dwell on that. I started to hear the two guys whistling and trying to call out to me, as if they were hunters looking for their prey. The anguish consumed me, and with all the adrenaline I had, I ended up vomiting all the alcohol I had drunk that night, plus the food I had eaten for dinner. It was a terrible moment. I was scared and feeling like everything was a disaster. The only thing I could do was wait. I was hiding behind those apartment blocks, just trying to stay calm and remember how I had gotten to that point. After an eternity, when the atmosphere felt a little less tense, I decided I had to get out of there. I walked very slowly towards the exit, making sure no one was around, and even though I was shaking, I made it out. I walked, and finally through the shadows and streetlights, I finally saw the door to my boyfriend's building. The feeling of relief was incredible, although I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to being a victim of something horrible, surely. I didn't know at what point that night had gone from a celebration to a real nightmare. The next day when I met my friends, I tried to tell them what had happened. At first, they couldn't believe it had happened to me. One of them, Sam, looked at me with a worried face and told me something that made my blood run cold. The guy who had stalked me had been waiting outside the club since 1 a.m., pacing back and forth like a stalking predator. That left me pondering. How had I missed him? The reality is that I was so caught up in my own world, drunk and distracted, that I didn't pay attention. How could you not notice? Sam repeated, staring at me in disbelief. And deep down I knew it had been my fault for walking home alone, completely drunk and with my phone off. The lesson was clear. Be careful and never underestimate anyone. Sometimes people can be more dangerous than we think. In the end, I accomplished the most important thing. I am alive and safe. And although it may sound corny, I felt a very deep gratitude. Thank God I was spared something terrible in one moment when it seemed like everything was falling apart. But in the next, I was here, telling my story. Life is fragile and you never know what fate has in store for you, so from that day on, I promised to take better care of myself, not to go out alone when I had taken, and above all, to be more aware of my surroundings. It's a crazy and very cruel world out there, and I don't want to be one more victim of some psychopath. When I was a kid, my dad worked at a bar and steakhouse right next to the beach. In addition to being the chef, He organized and played music at the bike and car shows they had at the restaurant. The car shows were on Thursdays, and the motorcycle shows were on Saturdays. This detail is key to the story. The thing is, because the car shows coincided with school nights, I was rarely allowed to attend, but my dad did take me to the motorcycle nights, and truth be told, that was great. According to everyone, I was a lovable kid and pretty laid back, and the bikers absolutely adored me. I know it sounds like it wasn't the best environment for a little kid, but I learned a lot about loyalty and friendship from them. My dad would always tell me that some of those bikers would call the bar just to see if I was in that weekend, and many times they would bring me stuffed animals and candy. My favorite of all was a guy I affectionately called Uncle Mark. He was a friend of my parents and a real giant. He was about 6 feet tall and weighed around 180 pounds. An ex-Marine who loved his motorcycle and his cigars. Every week for 6 years he would show up there without fail. It was 2004. I was 6 years old, and that night something happened that I will never forget. My dad had taken me to the motorcycle show as usual, but after 8 p.m., I could no longer keep my eyes open. Even though the show didn't end until 10, my old man had realized I needed a plan. So, every time I went, he'd put an inflatable mattress in the back of the bar for me to sleep on for a while, and he and Uncle Mark would come over to check on me every so often to make sure I was okay. One night, I was there sleeping as usual, when suddenly I felt a hand on my shoulder. I opened my eyes and saw a guy I had seen on the place before. He was no big deal. He was wearing a plaid shirt and jeans that looked a little worn, but he didn't inspire terror in me or anything. He smiled at me and introduced himself as Ship, claiming that he was a friend of my dad's and that he had asked him to take me home. My parents had always told me to be careful around strangers, to never talk to anyone I didn't know, so I went into alarm at the time. But this guy somehow knew my name and also my dad's. He even called me by the nickname everyone used for me. That made me let my guard down. I was totally confident, so I stood up and grabbed the biker hat that Uncle Mark had given me. Then I started walking towards the parking lot without thinking about anything else. At that moment, everything seemed normal. The music from the bar played in the background, mixed with people's laughter and conversations. But as I walked away from the safety of my father and the place that had been my refuge, I didn't realize how unexpected the rest of the night might be. Nothing to miss at 6 years old. Everything seemed to be going well, simple and uncomplicated. But deep down, a small alarm began to ring in my head, though at the time I decided to ignore it. What could possibly go wrong? That's the kind of thing you never think about as a kid, isn't it? When I got into Ship's car, I noticed it was an old 4-door sedan, not your typical biker's car. Of course, he didn't have a motorcycle to give me a ride, so he opted for this thing. He opened the back door for me, and when I sat down, the discomfort of the seat shocked me. The inside of the car was covered in plastic, like those granny couches in old people's homes. Everything felt weird, as if the plastic was trying to hide something, an attempt to protect the seat from any stains, surely. I guess this is when I think maybe it had a darker purpose, to avoid leaving fingerprints. The idea that everything in there was wrapped in plastic left a strange feeling in my stomach. As I settled into the seat, Ship tensed up a bit as if he was getting nervous as he started the car. Later, I realized that he had parked the car in a hidden spot, just behind the bar, as if not to be seen by the show attendees. I felt a little uneasy, but I didn't understand exactly why. However, everything changed in an instant. As I looked back out the car window, I saw Uncle Mark direct his imposing figure toward the door of the bar. He was a hard man to ignore. His size made him stand out in any crowd, and at that moment he turned his eyes toward Ship's car. At the sight of him, I just smiled, thinking maybe there was nothing to worry about. But deep down, a little voice in my head told me something wasn't right. Uncle Mark looked up just then and saw me in the backseat of the car. I smiled unconsciously, as if that could make him understand that everything was all right. But he knew something wasn't right. Uncle Mark didn't hesitate for a second to act, so without thinking, he shot off on his motorcycle and I watched him ride across the parking lot like a warrior in search of a mission. Before I knew it, I was only a few feet away from the car, and Ship, seeing Uncle Mark approaching in the rearview mirror, began to accelerate. He must have realized the situation was getting out of hand, but didn't accept it until it was too late. Chip knew he couldn't run and the tension was palpable. My mind was racing a mile a minute at that moment, because I knew something was going on, but in my innocence, I didn't understand what. The road we had to take out of the parking lot was long, maybe about 1.5 miles, and then you had to turn down another street before reaching the highway. But at that moment, logic went out the window. The towering figure of Uncle Mark was rapidly approaching, and although Ship tried to speed up and lose him, it was to no avail. It was obvious that Ship was scared, as he knew that Uncle Mark was not someone you wanted to upset. The guy had made his life on two wheels and had survived things that others couldn't even talk about, so Chip knew well that he was in trouble. At one point, Ship looked back at me, and in a calm but clearly tense tone, told me to get out of the car fast. Now I was really scared, but something inside me told me I had to do as he said. So without a second thought, I opened the door and ran out to Uncle Mark at full speed. I must say that until that moment I was not even aware of the situation I was in, but still, I felt scared and nervous. I guess it was my survival instinct acting beyond my conscience. As soon as I got out of the car, I could hear behind me the sound of burning tires as Ship accelerated to the maximum in his attempts to escape. But that didn't matter, because in an instant, I was already in the arms of Uncle Mark, who hugged me very tightly, almost as if he wanted to protect me from everything. "Don't worry, it's all right now," he said, as he carried me to the back of his Harley, making sure I was safe. I felt the wind hit my face as we began to move forward, away from the sedan and the situation that had left me so nervous. When we arrived back at the restaurant, the place was in chaos. There were police cars surrounding the bar, and most people had run out, some with worried faces and others looking for their children. My dad was outside, sobbing and screaming my name on the sidewalk, and seeing him, my heart broke in two. He was such a strong and protective man, and seeing him like that made me feel guilty for every minute I had spent away from his side. Uncle Mark carefully got me off the bike, and before I could do anything, my father lunged toward me, grabbing me with all the strength only a father can have when he fears for his child's safety. The worry on his face turned to relief that I was safe. At that moment, tears cascaded, and my father kept repeating, "Sonny, you're okay, you're okay, you're safe now, you're with Daddy." Never in my life will I ever forget that instant when I ran to Uncle Mark and hugged him with all the strength I had, and then that desperate hug from Dad. It was as if the world stopped for a second, and in the midst of all the emotions that bombarded me, I felt that sense of peace and security that you only find in a father's arms. After that, everything became a bit of a blur in my mind. I vaguely remember moments of talking to a couple of police officers, being asked about what had happened and feeling completely out of place, not quite knowing what to say. I even went down to the police station to chat with a sketch artist and give him a description of Chip. It was really weird, and I didn't get to set foot in the house until around 2 a.m. During that time, Uncle Mark never left my side, and my father's side. Officers had put out a notice everywhere about the car being reported stolen, and the sketch they made of Ship was starting to circulate on the local news. But the truth is, while it all sounded great, it didn't lead to anything useful. I remember at one point being asked to identify some faces in a lineup, but none of them were the guy I had been with. I couldn't help but feel that this was all about a bad dream. Now fast forward about 9 years from that night. I was now 15 years old, and my dad decided it was time for him to tell me the full story of what had happened. Since that night I hadn't forgotten, but I had managed to block out a lot of details. Uncle Mark had mentioned a few times that he had seen Ship hanging around the bike show, and apparently he was a regular at the restaurant. My dad explained that this guy knew my nickname and had been watching me for over a month. How creepy did that sound? Now everything was falling into place. I remembered from time to time how Ship had been keeping tabs on my schedule. It was like he knew exactly when I was going with my dad and Uncle Mark to the show. After the police investigation, people had assumed that everyone who used to go to the motorcycle show had left because the police were checking out the crime scene. But they were wrong. In reality, everyone was looking for Ship. Uncle Mark had passed the make model of the car to the cops along with a description of it. One of the guys in the crowd thought that sounded a lot like a guy who used to be in one of the motorcycle bars in the area. I remember asking my dad how it was when they finally caught him. He was silent for quite a while, as if he was reminiscing about that precise moment. They found him, but it wasn't easy, he finally told me. There was an operation following the leads, and finally, the police managed to track him down. He'd been trying to go unnoticed, but he was caught in a trap. At that moment, I felt a shiver run down my spine. In the end, Uncle Mark and my father received a thank you from the police for their help. My dad continued to talk, assuring me that I was safe and that he would never let someone like Ship near me again. But the lesson of that night was forever etched in my mind. Although there are bad people in the world, there are also those who are willing to do whatever it takes to protect the ones they love. Since that night, every time I look back, I see not only the fear, but the bravery of those who stood by my side, fighting to keep me safe. I know now that life can be complicated, but there is always hope and love to protect us from the darkness. After college, there was a time when I felt like a leaf floating aimlessly, without a plan or hope for the future. Like many, I ended up surrounded by a group of people just as lost. We spent our nights partying, drinking until we lost control, and in the meantime, we slept during the day like vampires. My partner in debauchery at that time was Laura. We met our freshman year because we were put in the dorm together, and luckily we got along really great. So when I decided to move into my own place, Laura came with me. It wasn't long before she became the queen of drinking, holding more than the most macho guys at whatever party we were at. Every weekend, guys would come over to our table, only to end up underneath her at Laura's feet. I secretly admired her for her skill, but at the same time I worried that it would lead her down a dark path, and boy did I have reason to believe so. By the time our graduation came around, we were in the same situation. We had our degrees in hand, but no job and not much hope. A whole year went by and neither Laura nor I were getting jobs in our chosen fields, while we struggled with mediocre jobs during the week and the weekend was still our time for unreserved fun. The dynamic hadn't changed much. My friend drank without limits, and I tried to survive one more night out, as we managed to make ends meet on our meager salaries, which we practically left nailed down in the bars around town. As the months passed, my happiness faded more and more. Alcohol became a bigger part of my life, and I was so wrapped up in my own problems that I didn't realize that Laura was self-destructing in a really frantic way. It was obvious that we both had a serious alcohol problem, but in my friend's case, the issue had taken on much more serious proportions. Before, she enjoyed knocking down those arrogant guys who thought they were the hard drinkers. But since we graduated, the reality of life hit us hard, and among all the difficulties we faced, drinking became the only thing that cheered her up, so she no longer drank only on weekends, but daily had a glass of whiskey for breakfast, according to her, to start the day in high spirits. This made me laugh at first, but little by little this behavior began to worry me. However, every time I said something to her about it, she just laughed and said that I was being exaggerated and made jokes about alcohol being her fuel and holding drinks being her superpower. One weekend, a coworker threw a birthday party, and of course we attended. That night, all those years of abuse Laura had inflicted on her body began to take their toll. Soon after arriving, she found a new challenger, and they started exchanging drinks like there was no tomorrow. But shortly after a few hours, I started to notice that my friend looked really bad. I had never seen her like that before. She was not only very drunk, but her face was turning a yellowish tone, and she was sweating like crazy. I was obviously worried about her and asked her if she was okay, but she answered yes with an obvious effort and full of disdain. About 30 minutes passed and Laura was still drinking shot after shot. This time it was tequila, so I didn't even know how she was still standing. But then, from one moment to the next, Laura passed out. As I did another round of drinks, my friend fell to the floor with a thud, and everyone was in shock. But I knew she wasn't just drunk, so I ran over to her and tried to wake her up, but she wasn't responding, and I started to get really scared. So I convinced one of the guys to take her to my car, and I drove like crazy to the hospital. Obviously, I went with her and stayed in the emergency room while the medical staff did their work. During that time, 1,000 thoughts ran through my head, all but the most obvious one. But around 1 o'clock in the morning, my worst fears were realized. Laura needed a new liver. She had completely destroyed hers from years of partying. The doctor told me that, in all his years of career, he had only seen one person in his 20s with such severe liver damage. I would never have believed that my friend's condition was so serious, and I panicked just imagining the worst. When I finally got to see her, she was acting as if nothing was wrong. I spent almost an hour trying to make her see how serious her situation was, but she turned her back on me. She seemed to completely ignore me. She was in complete denial. The doctor warned me that if she didn't change her lifestyle, she would be dead in a couple of years, which made my stomach turn. Laura, more than my best friend, was like a sister to me. For years, we had been inseparable, and the very thought of losing her terrified me like nothing else. But she didn't seem to care too much about her own life, and once she was discharged, she went back to her habits as if everything was fine. I did my best to make her understand that her lifestyle was ruining her. I even stopped drinking myself, but to no avail. However, seeing how Laura was slowly killing herself made me reflect on my own reality. So I started exercising and eating better, and lost 30 pounds in the process. I felt amazing and did everything I could to convince Laura to change her life too. But again, I hit a wall. I couldn't stand by and watch her self-destruct day by day, so I made the difficult decision to move. This was not something she took well, and from then on our friendship became distant. Apart from a couple of occasional calls, we lost contact almost completely. I had decided to be someone different and cut ties with all the self-destructive habits I had been accumulating in my life, while she continued in a downward spiral that we both knew could only lead her to one destination. I remember well the day I saw her in the coffin, her body motionless and rigid. I cried so much, not only for our separation, but for the fact that this was a death foretold, and my friend never wanted to embrace her own life. I did not feel guilty, for I knew I had done everything in my power to pull her out of the pit of self-destruction she was in. I wish I could have convinced her to join me. Since those days, my life has improved tremendously. The more optimistic I became, the more motivation I had to improve other aspects of my life. Now that I was no longer spending entire days recovering from hangovers, I had time and energy to help others, so I started volunteering with special needs students at the local high school. The principal seemed to like my work, so he encouraged me to go back to school to get my credentials and join the staff full-time. Since then, I have been a teacher for almost 5 years, and I enjoy it more every day. Not long ago, a student asked me about my life before I became a teacher. I was a little reluctant to tell him how lost I had been at that time, but I wanted him to understand the importance of living a healthy life without excess. So I told this story, and told him that when we are young, it seems like we have all the time in the world to waste. But I found that the more free time I had, the more problems I encountered. That may not be the answer I wanted, but it is an important lesson to learn. This happened to me when I was just a kid, and now that I'm over 40, I hadn't remembered those 10-year-old days for quite a while. I remember I was just shy of my first decade when everything turned upside down in my life and my family's life. That birthday was the best birthday ever because my mom had been sneaking around saving up to buy me my own bike. I couldn't have been more excited. Finally, I wasn't going to have to go around borrowing from my older siblings, or standing on the back or sitting on the handlebars of my friends' bikes. We weren't exactly rich. In fact, we had rather very little, so getting that bike was a great deal for me. My dad, on the other hand, was a guy who worked a lot, but he also drank more than he worked. The truth is, he was always more drunk than anything else, and so he wasn't around the house much, which in the end suited us because my dad was a very volatile person and would often react violently to anything. So as long as he stayed away, my mom, my brothers, and I lived quietly. But when he came around, we knew we had to shut up and stay out of it. We lived on the edge of a small town, on a long dirt road with few neighbors around. The closest one was a good mile away, on a huge farm with fields all around. I had friends who were children of that family, and they were our age, so we would see each other at school. Those boys' mom was a sweetheart, always offering us something to snack on or a drink when we stopped by her house. In contrast, their dad was totally different from mine. I never saw him drunk or yelling at his kids or his wife. It was clear to me that not all families were like ours. Some fathers really seemed to care about their children. I remember it was right around my 10th birthday because my mom had baked me a huge cake to share with my brothers and 2 younger sisters. And of course, she was treating herself too. She then took me to where she had hidden my new bike in one of the sheds. When I saw it, I squealed with excitement, hugged her, and gave her a big kiss, telling her I loved her and that she was the best mom in the world. I got on my bike right away and started riding around the road. It was an amazing feeling, a moment when all the good seems to cover up all the bad and stressful things in life that honestly seem to be normal at that age. It's hard to describe, but everything felt perfect. The next 2 days were wonderful, especially since my dad had hardly been home for a week and would occasionally stop by just to check on things. My mom hadn't kicked him out of the house or anything. In those days, I barely remember when he stayed more than 1 or 2 nights in a row. Never both nights at once. We kids never really knew what my dad was doing. Truth be told, we didn't really want to ask either. We just knew that things were much better when he wasn't home. But 2 days later, I remember riding my bike back into town to buy something for my mom, and I was pedaling down the dirt road when my dad's truck drove by. It gave me that bad feeling that made me think about not going home. But what else could I do? The sun was already setting, and he usually came back after work or late at night. So it was strange to see him come back at that time. By the time I got to the yard, I could already hear the screaming. I could hear my mom's voice trying to reason with him, but my dad's was just covering it up. Then I heard a loud knock. I didn't want to go inside. Inside, my little sister was playing, and in the distance I could hear my mom crying. My older brother was at the neighbor's house, so I couldn't count on him either, but I didn't dare go inside at that moment, even though I couldn't leave my mom and sisters alone with him. I looked out the door window and watched my dad destroy the house right in front of our family, as if he had gone completely crazy. I tried to open the door a little and tell my sister to come out, but the scene with my dad kept escalating. I blocked out a lot of those images, but what I remember is him turning around and lunging straight at me, grabbing me by the shoulders and screaming in my face. My mom was behind him, pleading with him to let go of me, but instead he slapped her again, and she backed away. At that point, he looked like he had snapped out of it. He was furious to see me there. On the bike he knew wasn't my brother's, and when he got into an argument with my mom about the bike he gave me at my birthday party, he accused her of secretly keeping money to buy it for me. As soon as he approached me, I knew he had been drinking heavily, probably for 5 or 6 days straight, because the breath coming out of him was a whiskey whiff that was coming up my nose as he scolded me. He was convinced that my mom was hiding other things from him and that he was going to find out what it was, so he started tearing the house apart. My dad had made a real mess. Furniture was thrown all over the place, lamps on their sides and pictures in pieces. When he got to me, he threw me against one of the walls. The glasses and plates from the kitchen were shattered and scattered on the floor. When I looked up, I saw him enter the kitchen again and smash what was left of my birthday cake against the back door. My 2 sisters were huddled in the corner, hugging each other, and my mom was crying with blood running down her face. That was too much for me. It was the worst thing I had ever seen in my entire life, and I was scared to death. So I ran out of the house, jumped on my bike, and raced to the neighbor's house. We didn't have a phone in our house, but I knew they did, so I was going to call the police and put an end to it all. I had barely pulled out of the driveway when I heard the front door open and my dad yelling at me to come back. But I didn't. I just kept pedaling, thinking that if I could just get to the neighbors, everything would be taken care of. It was at that moment that I heard the van start up. I looked back and saw it backing down the driveway, coming straight at me. But then I looked ahead and could see the neighbor's house in the distance, so I kept pedaling. But the headlights were getting closer and closer. When I looked again, it was so close that I knew it was going to catch me. I didn't think twice. I jumped off the bike to the side of the road and fell into the field, got up and started running through the grass, listening to my dad yelling but not paying attention to him. When I looked back, I saw that he had turned around and was heading back to our house. I finally arrived at the neighbor's house a few minutes later and knocked on the door. My friend's mom opened it and stepped back, seeing me sobbing and shaking, so she took me inside and called her husband. I was about to tell them what had happened, but just then my brother and his friend came in after having been playing, and when they heard what was happening, in a matter of seconds, my brother bolted into the house while the mom decided to call the police. They said they would send someone right away, but about 10 minutes passed and still no officer had arrived, so I begged her husband to please take me home. I didn't know what was going on and I was consumed with fear. Fortunately, he agreed to take me because he knew my little sisters and my mom were in the house. We passed by the place where I had left my bicycle, and I saw with horror that it was in pieces. My dad had run over it with his truck. This was heartbreaking for me. I felt as if the most precious thing I had at that moment had been taken away from me. So I started crying again. When we got home, my dad's truck was gone. Apparently, my older brother had run all the way there, picked up a shovel that was leaning against the wall of the house, and without a second thought, threw himself on top of my dad and smashed his knee while my dad was still screaming, but then limped out of the house, threatening my brother. On the contrary, he threatened to smash the shovel over his head if he came back. My brother then picked up my sisters and my mom and took them to a room, while Dad managed to get to the truck and drove off. Just the police arrived a couple of minutes after he left, and my neighbor and I arrived at the house. However, they went out looking for my dad and found him about an hour later in a tavern in town. I told the police that he wasn't too hard to track down, as he was a notorious drunk in the area. so the bars were the first place they should look for him. They practically arrested him on the spot that night. After the police found him, the neighbors offered to let us stay with them for as long as necessary. My mom was embarrassed, but very grateful for their help. We only stayed a couple of days, enough for her to arrange our move to my aunt's house a few hundred miles away. I never saw my dad again after that, and honestly, it didn't matter to me that he wasn't in jail very long. Shortly after we moved in with my aunt, the phone calls and letters started, but my mom never budged, so he ended up giving in and agreed to the divorce. I didn't pay much attention to that. I was young and living a different life. We spent a couple of years with my aunt until my mom managed to save enough money after getting a job, and we got our own place. At that time, my brother was 18, so he was also lending a hand, working and earning money. I, for my part, got a job delivering newspapers and even saved enough to buy another bike. In the end, life was much better than before, and after all, if we could have a normal childhood after that,